The sun was low, painting the horizon in blood-red streaks, casting long shadows across the dry Texas plains. A lone cabin stood near the edge of a worn dirt road, the kind where the wind whispered through the gaps in the wooden walls and carried the scent of dust and hay. Inside, a young woman, her hands trembling, backed against the corner of the room, eyes wide and glistening. She was small, fragile even, yet there was a fire in her gaze that refused to be snuffed out. "You'll hurt me," she said, her voice barely rising above a whisper, shaking with a mix of fear and defiance. Every word trembled on her lips, a fragile shield against the unknown. The man before her, tall, broad-shouldered and clad in a weather-beaten coat, didn't flinch. His face was calm, almost unreadable, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. He had been watching her for days, noting the way she moved, how she carried herself, the subtle tension in her shoulders. There was caution in every step she took, every glance she threw over her shoulder. He knew her fear, recognized it even, but he also knew the strength beneath it. He stepped closer, boots creaking against the worn floorboards, and she flinched instinctively, pressing her back harder into the corner. "I won't hurt you," he said, his voice steady, low, carrying the weight of someone who had lived through more storms than most could imagine. But his words did little to ease the fire of panic flickering across her skin. She shook her head, lips pressed tight. "You don't understand. You can't." He paused, just out of reach. Hands relaxed at his sides, yet the tension in the room was palpable. Dust hung in the air, particles dancing in the streaks of sunlight that fell through the cracked window. Every heartbeat was loud, every breath a reminder of the storm building between them. "You've been through too much," he said finally, voice rough, steadying, almost mournful. "And I've seen enough to know that hiding from it won't help. Not now." Her lips parted but no words came. She could only stare, chest rising and falling, eyes wide and fearful, yet drawn inexplicably to him. There was something in the way he moved, deliberate and careful, that told her he wasn't reckless, that he understood danger but he also understood courage. A creak in the floorboards behind him made her flinch again. He hadn't noticed. He was focused entirely on her, on the fragile line between fear and trust that stretched taut like a wire between them. The wind outside whispered through the cracks, carrying the faint smell of horses and dry grass. "You think I don't care what happens to you," he said, voice low, a shadow of emotion threading through the calm. "But I do. More than I can say." She swallowed hard. The words were almost too much to believe. Her life had been measured in fear, in cautious steps and muffled cries. And now, a man who could have been like any other, like those who had used her before, was standing there, refusing to let the world dictate the terms of this moment. Her hands twitched, curling into fists at her sides. Why should I trust you?" she asked, voice barely audible. "You don't even know me." He didn't answer right away. He tilted his head, considering, weighing the invisible scales of risk and trust. The light from the window caught the edges of his weathered face, highlighting lines carved from years of sun, wind, and hard labor. Every mark told a story. Every shadow spoke of battles fought silently, scars borne without complaint. "I don't," he admitted finally. "But I do know this. You've been running from more than just me, and I can't let you do it alone." Her chest tightened, and for a long moment, they simply stared at each other. The space between them charged, electric, almost unbearable. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin and shaking loose a few dry leaves that had blown in through the cracks. She felt the world pressing in, the vast emptiness of the plains, the horizon stretching endlessly, yet all that seemed to matter was this room, this man, this fragile, impossible connection. "You can't," she whispered again, but it was quieter now, almost a confession, a challenge thrown not at him but at herself. She wanted to run, wanted to hide, wanted to pretend that the fear was enough to keep him at bay, but deep down, a spark of something else, a dangerous, fragile hope ignited, threatening to overwhelm the panic. He stepped closer, still, slow, deliberate. His hands stayed at his sides, but the movement of his body, the closeness, made her heart race. Every instinct screamed at her to recoil, but she didn't, not yet. Something about the steadiness of his gaze, the calm certainty in his presence, grounded her. "You think I'll hurt you," he said, voice low, almost a rumble. "But what I want, it's not to take from you, it's to give, to protect, to make you see that the world doesn't have to break you." The words hung in the air, impossible and heavy. She wanted to believe them, wanted desperately to let go of the fear that had defined her life for so long, and yet she was frozen, caught in that fragile space between defiance and surrender. He reached out, slow, careful, a hand hovering just above hers. She flinched but didn't pull away, didn't move. The tension was almost unbearable, a taut wire straining with every heartbeat, every shallow breath. "I won't hurt you," he said again, a whisper meant for just her, a promise carried through years of solitude and hard living. "But I need you to trust me." Her lips parted, and for the first time, she didn't speak. She couldn't. There were no words strong enough, no defenses left that could hold back the storm of feeling rising inside her. And in that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to glimmer, She realized something terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She was not ready to fight him, not yet. And he, standing there with a quiet strength honed from a lifetime on the plains, knew that the unthinkable was coming. The evening settled into a thick, quiet darkness, only broken by the faint glow of the hearth fire, flickering and casting long dancing shadows across the cabin walls. She stood frozen where she had been, back pressed against the corner, every muscle taut with tension. His presence was overwhelming, solid, unyielding, yet strangely reassuring. The wind outside had died down, leaving the vast, empty plains to hold their silence. "I'm serious," she said, voice low, almost a growl, a fragile shield against the fear clawing at her chest. "You don't understand what I've been through. You can't." He didn't move closer, not yet. Instead, he let her words settle, let the weight of them hang in the room like smoke. "Maybe not," he admitted, voice calm, deliberate, "but I understand enough. I know what it means to feel trapped, to feel like the world itself is pressing down on you. And I know you're stronger than you think." Her green eyes darted to him, sharp, wary, trying to see if there was a flicker of deceit in his expression. But there was none. Only quiet, unshakable resolve. She swallowed hard, chest rising and falling rapidly. Fear and curiosity battled within her, a dangerous mix that made every step of this night feel like walking a razor's edge. "You think I'm weak," she whispered, almost to herself. "You don't know what I've survived." He let out a soft chuckle, the sound low and almost startled by its own gentleness. "No," he said, "I don't think you're weak. That's the thing. You're strong, too strong for this world sometimes, and that's why you've survived. But strength alone doesn't always mean safety." Her heart skipped a beat. The words weren't meant to soothe, yet somehow they did. She looked away, toward the window, watching the last slivers of red and gold fade behind the horizon. The plains outside seemed endless, lonely, echoing her own sense of isolation. And yet, in the room, the tension between them hummed like electricity in the air. He moved then, slow, deliberate, closing the gap between them in careful, measured steps. His hand reached out, hovering near hers, not touching, but close enough for her to feel the heat of intention radiating off him. She flinched, back pressing harder against the rough wood of the cabin wall, but didn't move away. Something inside her, fragile, dangerous hope made her hesitate, made her want to see what lay beyond the fear. "You're scared," he said softly, voice like gravel and smoke. "And you should be. You've earned caution, but I'm not the danger. Not tonight. Not if you let me show you." Her lips parted, a shaky exhale escaping. The words she wanted to say lodged somewhere in her throat, tangled between fear, curiosity, and an unfamiliar longing. She had learned to trust no one, had built walls higher than any she could climb, and yet, here he was, patient, unyielding, refusing to give up. "Why?" she asked finally, voice barely audible. "Why do you care?" He paused as if weighing the truth of the answer. The firelight caught the lines of his weathered face, highlighting years of sunburned skin, scars, and a stubborn kind of resolve. "Because I've seen too many people lose themselves to fear," he said, low, almost a whisper. "Because I know what it's like to watch someone be broken, and do nothing. I can't do nothing again." She blinked, her chest tightening. Those words, raw and honest, struck something deep inside her. Years of fear, pain, and survival had hardened her heart. Yet here, in this small, quiet cabin, she felt it begin to crack. One careful step at a time, he bridged the distance between caution and trust. She began, but faltered. Her fingers twitched, unsure whether to curl into fists or reach out. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to protect herself. Yet another part she hadn't dared acknowledge in years long to see what would happen if she didn't. The room was silent, save for the fire's low hiss and the faint creak of the cabin settling. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden glow, and the air seemed to thrum with anticipation. Time stretched, elongated by the tension of the unspoken, the untested. He spoke again, voice steady, deliberate. "You don't have to make a choice tonight. Not really. Just let me be here. Let me prove that fear doesn't have to be the only thing that controls your life." Her eyes darted to him, searching for deception, for cruelty, for any reason to doubt. She found none. Only patience, only steady, quiet determination. And in that moment, something fragile, nearly imperceptible, shifted, a spark of trust. A thread of connection that had taken years to weave, fragile yet strong, began to form. Her body trembled, not just from fear, but from the intensity of feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience in years. Vulnerability, desire, a dangerous hope that perhaps someone, somewhere, could see her, not just the scars, not just the fear, but her whole raw self and care. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, his presence undeniable. She didn't step back this time, only braced herself, unsure what would come next. Every nerve in her body screamed for caution, yet another whispered for surrender. "You're safe," he said again, a low rumble that seemed to echo in her chest. "But I can't stay half in and half out. I need you to decide. Are you going to trust me?" She shook her head slowly, uncertain, lips trembling. I don't know." He didn't press. He simply lowered his hand, close enough to touch but not yet, respecting the fragile barrier she had erected. "Then we'll take it slow," he said, "one step at a time. That's all I ask." Her shoulders sagged just slightly, the first sign of release in the tension that had gripped her since the sun dipped below the horizon. She let out a shuddering breath, a mix of relief and lingering fear. The room felt smaller, warmer, and yet infinitely more dangerous, because for the first time in a long while, she had opened a door. Minutes passed like hours. Neither spoke. The fire crackled, embers popping softly, the only sound in the still night. And yet, the air between them had changed, thick with unspoken possibilities and the promise of something neither could fully name. "You survived this long," he said finally, voice low, almost reverent. "You're stronger than most, and if you let me, I'll prove that strength doesn't have to be lonely." Her eyes met his, wide, searching, uncertain. There was no agreement yet, no surrender, only the slow, careful acknowledgement of something fragile, something real. Her voice was a whisper, trembling yet steady. Maybe I can try." And that was all he needed. One small thread of trust, a single spark, to ignite a moment that could change everything. The night stretched on, silent but alive, charged with possibility. The kind of tension that held hearts in a delicate balance between fear and hope. He didn't move to overwhelm her, didn't seize the moment recklessly. Instead, he let her set the pace, letting her breath steady, letting her own courage guide the next step. The fire cast long shadows across the cabin walls, reflecting their cautious, trembling shapes. "You don't have to be brave all at once," he said softly, voice rough with sincerity. "Just brave enough to see that maybe, just maybe, not everything has to hurt." Her lips parted, a shiver running down her spine, but she didn't turn away. Her green eyes glistened in the firelight, vulnerability giving way to cautious curiosity, a fragile, dangerous hope. The cabin felt smaller now, closer, intimate, as if the world outside, the vast harsh plains had fallen away, leaving only this moment suspended in time. He stepped closer, still, careful, deliberate. The air between them hummed with unspoken tension, the kind that made hearts race and breaths catch. Her voice was barely audible, trembling raw with uncertainty and anticipation. "Please," she whispered, the single word hanging in the air like a prayer, a challenge, and a confession all at once. He froze, eyes locking on hers. For the first time, he realized that the moment was no longer about courage or fear, it was about connection. Fragile and untested, but undeniable. And in that pause, the weight of unspoken emotions, untested desires, and past scars pressed down on them both, a force impossible to ignore. And in the silence, thick and electric, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only this room, this moment, this impossible delicate tension stretching between them. The cabin felt impossibly small now, the air thick and heavy with the unspoken. He held his position, chest tight, eyes locked on hers, feeling the tremor in her voice and the tiny, hesitant steps she had taken toward trust. The fire flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls, mirroring the tension that stretched between them. Outside, the wind whispered across the plains, carrying secrets and old ghosts. But inside, time seemed suspended. Her voice quivered as she whispered again, "Please, don't stop now." The words were fragile, loaded with desperation, yet laced with a daring hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. His heart thudded in his chest, caught between instinct and patience, knowing that any sudden move could shatter the fragile thread of trust she had allowed him to touch. He stepped closer, deliberately slow, making sure every movement was careful, deliberate, measured. His hand hovered near hers, not pressing, not claiming, only waiting for the silent invitation. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, fear, and something else, something he had been waiting for, something rare and dangerous. Willingness. "You don't know what you're asking," he said softly, voice low and rough like gravel. But there was no admonition in it, only acknowledgement. "And maybe you don't have to. Just trust me. Trust yourself." Her lips parted, and for a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hiss of the fire and the quickening of their breaths. The tension was unbearable, almost physical, and yet it wasn't frightening anymore. It was alive, charged, and undeniable. She shifted slightly, moving closer, daring him with her gaze. I can't," she admitted, trembling. "I'm scared." "And that's okay," he replied, voice steady. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward even when your heart tells you to run, and you've already survived more than anyone should." Her green eyes softened, glistening with unspoken emotion, and for the first time she allowed herself to lean into the moment. Their hands brushed lightly, just a fleeting contact, yet it sent sparks through her entire body. He froze, letting her take the lead, allowing the fragile trust she had built to guide the next step. The firelight reflected in her eyes, illuminating vulnerability, longing, and the remnants of pain that she had carried like armor for years. And in that glance he saw all of it, her strength, her scars, her resilience. He reached out again, this time letting his fingers lightly graze hers, a tentative connection that spoke louder than words ever could. "You're safe," he whispered, voice low, almost reverent. "I'm not here to hurt you, not ever." Her breath caught, chest rising and falling in shallow, nervous gasps. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, meeting his gaze with a mixture of fear and trust. The moment stretched, suspended in time, charged with emotions neither of them had fully explored, yet both understood. Slowly, cautiously, she allowed her hand to linger in his, a tiny, almost imperceptible step of surrender, a fragile acknowledgement that perhaps not every encounter had to end in pain or betrayal. And as their fingers intertwined, the tension in the room shifted, transforming from fear to possibility, from hesitation to connection. He pulled her slightly closer, careful not to overstep, letting her set the pace, honoring the delicate balance between desire and consent, between fear and courage. She trembled, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in just slightly, a silent invitation, a whisper of trust. The night outside deepened, shadows stretching long and dark across the plains. But inside, the cabin glowed with warmth, intimacy, and the fragile beginnings of something neither of them had dared to hope for. "You're stronger than you know," he murmured, voice almost a caress. "And brave, too. Brave enough to let someone in, brave enough to survive all of this, brave enough to trust again." Her lips quivered, a faint smile tugging at the corners, her defenses slowly melting under the weight of sincerity and patience. She leaned closer still, her breath mingling with his, the electricity between them almost unbearable in its intensity. And then, finally, she allowed herself to close the distance, just slightly, letting the world outside vanish for the briefest moment. "You," she began, voice low, trembling, I don't know what comes next." He pressed a gentle finger to her lips, halting the words before they could falter. "Then we take it one step at a time," he said softly, heart pounding. "No rush, no expectations, just right here, right now." And in that fragile, suspended moment, the past, the pain, the fear, they all seemed to dissolve. If only for a heartbeat. There were two souls, battered by life, by the vast, cruel plains, finding a tentative connection, fragile but real, between the flickering shadows of the cabin walls. Outside, the wind stirred briefly, rustling the dry grass and carrying distant whispers across the horizon. But inside, the world was silent, save for the crackle of the fire and the quickened rhythm of hearts learning to beat together. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, a soft exhale that spoke of relief, surrender, and the beginnings of trust. He mirrored it, letting himself relax just slightly, letting the tension ebb, knowing that the night had changed everything. Yet nothing had been rushed. "You'll hurt me," she whispered again, almost a challenge this time, eyes locking on his with daring and uncertainty. "I won't," he said firmly, voice low, steady, unyielding. "Not tonight, not ever. And if I do, you can stop me. You have that right, but I promise, I won't." Her lips parted, and in the flickering firelight, she allowed herself to lean in fully this time, letting the unspoken fears and desires find their voice in a single, fragile act of trust. And as their hands intertwined and the night wrapped around them like a protective cloak, the cabin, the plains, the world outside of it faded. In the silence that followed, heavy with unspoken words and untested emotions, there was only the fire, the warmth, and the connection slowly solidifying between them. Fear, desire, longing, and trust, all mingled in a single, fragile thread that stretched across the room, tying them together in ways neither could fully name. And as dawn crept over the horizon, painting the plains with soft golden light, the cabin remained silent, holding the memory of the night's tension, the first steps of trust, and the unspoken promise that neither would be alone anymore. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of something she had thought lost forever, hope, and he too felt it, an unshakable, quiet relief, a promise of redemption, and the understanding that sometimes the unthinkable was not the end of fear, but the beginning of something much more extraordinary: connection, trust, and the slow, tentative first steps toward healing.